if we take the 100-year storm event, it nearly take all of Wooddale, Itasca to contain that. So when we talk about flood volumes and flood protection, and you think about going down by the Arboretum every time it floods in Illinois, Route 53 is closed at Park Boulevard because 53 is flooded. The fact of the matter is, the real solution to major flooding beyond reservoirs is going to be to get people out of the floodplains. So we're going to focus on, and trees are very helpful in the smaller storms and with water quality. Well, what are the tree roles in stormwater management? A tree is a big item. We mostly think of deciduous trees, and when we do, when you draw a deciduous tree, or your kids drew them, what they do, they made a lollipop. You put a big circle and you put a stem down. And it looks like something that you got from the Tootsie folks. Well, the fact of the matter is that's not a bad image for many of the trees, but as was pointed out earlier, one of the best trees for interception of water is a Norway spruce because of its total surface area. Because of its ability to have transpiration year-round if the ground isn't frozen, so water can be released back. So what do trees do? Well, trees are basically a structure. And what it's doing is it takes water as it comes out of the sky. If there are leaves on it, it intercepts or stops the smallest of rainfall events. Who hasn't, on a golf course maybe, had the rain start, been walking, not riding in a cart, right? We're all environmentally friendly, so we wouldn't ever take a golf cart. And it starts to rain a little bit, and you duck under a tree because it's dry. Why is it dry? Because the tree is intercepting the rainfall. What then happens is, if you notice, and we'll look at a leaf here in a minute, a leaf has veins in it, and most leaves, not all, are tipped backwards towards the back of the vein. And if they aren't, then they're tipped in a way that allows water to concentrate along the veins. That actually runs down the midrib, if it has one, or if it has a palmate type design, it runs down the fingers to a central point. That runs down, catches a stem, runs down. Eventually it comes down the trunk. That's the transfer function of water. That is a morphological adaptation of trees in humid climates. Trees in arid climates don't necessarily have that adaptation. So, important distinction. Once it transfers down, the root flares provide structure. They also provide a mechanism for channeling water around the base of the tree, and there are studies that were done at the Morton Arboretum by my advisor back in the late 70s and early 80s that looked at the moisture relations immediately around the tree and all the way out and at some depth. And you can watch the bulb of infiltration move out during a storm, expand out, and then the water gets taken up and transpired from the tree in the reverse process. So that storage reservoir in the soil fills up and pulls back out. If you took a general biology class and they taught you about how the water cycle works, that isn't what you were taught. You were taught that water falls down, hits the ground, the trees take it up and draw it to it. And the fact of the matter is, in forested ecosystems, it doesn't work that way at all. And it doesn't work that way if you have semi-mature or mature trees either. It does the out and back in. And so, some of the areas we need to be protecting with our trees, particularly in parkways, are a little different than we've previously thought. We do need to expand that mulch ring out further to allow a greater area of infiltration, but from the trunk out, not just a little ring at the trunk. In addition, we have the transpiration to the atmosphere, and there is some evaporation. Nice hot August day, late afternoon thunderstorm blows in, it drops the temperature 10, 15 degrees as a little thunderstorm blows through. There's a lot of water stored in the canopy of the tree on the leaves, and the sun comes out right after the storm goes away. As much as 40% of a small rainstorm may just evaporate back up out of the vegetation without ever reaching the ground. That's a very large amount of water. The purpose of all of this explanation is that Edith talked about some of the pollutant loading that's out there, particulates, and some of the particulates are not benign. There are sulfur and nitrous dioxides that are particulates, and what happens is those get attached to the vegetative surfaces they're on, and when the evaporation occurs, they stay on the surfaces and cause that cleansing of the air. The reason that it feels so clean and clear, even though it may be hot and muggy after a rainfall event. So interception on the leaf. Here, probably my favorite tree in the eastern hardwood forest is sweet gum. I am also a wetland scientist in my free time. Actually, it's how I make a living. Sweet gums are a tree of broad ecological amplitude, but they're largely a wetland tree. And these ribs show you the direction that water will get on that leaf, come down, and come to this point, collect, and then run down, the petiole and onto the twig. If you have a sweet gum, and if you don't, there are large numbers of them over on the east side of town. You can go pull one, and just pick up a leaf when they come down this year and take a look at them, and you'll find that the petiole, or this little stem, actually has a little U in it, and that actually channels moisture. So, a mature tree in full leaf, in a 1/4 inch rainfall, it can intercept as much as 60% of that rainfall, no matter how hard it comes down. 1/4 inch rainfall isn't very much. It's about 40% in a 1/2 inch rainfall, and by the time you get to a 1 inch rainfall, it drops to under 10%. But the problem with that is the intensity of most 1 inch rainfalls. They are typically very quick cloud bursts with massive amounts of water, and they bypass the system. Just like when a detention basin fills up during large rainstorms and then overflows, it's bypassing the system. For deciduous trees, they have little effect in the winter, but look at the effect that conifers can have in the winter. Who hasn't gone out after there's been a sleet storm and looked at either your own spruces and pines, or looked at the neighbors and gone, oh God, I hope that tree can handle the weight load of the water that has been intercepted during that event. That's what's happening, and that will get released slowly through a thawing event. Urban tree cover, how do we make those percentages into something that's meaningful for stormwater? I mean, look at the volumes that I showed you have to be controlled. 60, 40% leaf cover. How does that become meaningful? Well, the way it becomes meaningful is by aggregating up the amount of urban forest, by depending on the trees in your backyard and the trees that Peggy's responsible for in the parkway and in the public spaces, and treating those as the community urban forest, as a unit forest, and start to manage the community, the municipality, managing that in its aggregate and not as individuals. So for stormwater, that's going to take a change in thought process. New residential development, urban tree cover less than 1%. We've all seen it every 40 feet in the parkway. We stick in a 2.5 inch caliper tree, and when you do then an aerial projection down on those trees over the lot, less than 1% of the surface area is the crown of, depending on the width of your lot, the 1 or 2 trees that ended up in your park. Established trees can be anywhere from a range from 8 to 60%. That's actually from the work that the Forest Service did here in Chicago. The work that was done, those guys decided that Chicago wasn't a miserable enough place to work, so they went to Sacramento. Because apparently they just really enjoy misery. And they found that in the Central Valley of California, that those numbers were frankly very, very comparable. Not as much down at the 8% level, because when that west sun starts to set in the Central Valley in August, you know it. And so there is an awful lot more intent of planting on the west side of structures in Sacramento and Modesto and those areas. Commercial spaces, that was actually work that was done by Davey Tree in the not too distant past. And institutional numbers, actually numbers collected by Gary Watson and myself back in the 80s, and of course, like most things that Gary and I did, it'll get published someday. Open space, a real surprise to most people, and a bit of contention if you've ever either been on a plan commission or been in front of a plan commission. When a new development comes to town and there's a group that wants active recreation space versus passive recreation space, the trees are in fact the battleground. And the reason they're the battleground is that trees interfere with active recreation designs. And again, I make part of my living now on dealing with that interaction. But the fact of the matter is, nobody ever wants the shade of a tree to ever hit their soccer field. And they don't want it when it's a mature tree. And so the plantings go further and further out. And active recreation facilities for sports have a tendency to have trees around the perimeter and no internal tree canopy. That's not going to help us with stormwater management on those sites. Passive recreation, it runs the gamut. Well, between iTree and the recent work of some fellows at UC Berkeley and then Greg McPherson and his team, Davey Tree got the Forest Service's nod to put together the National Tree Benefit Calculator, which they get to have on their website. And frankly, I'd go out and figure out how big my tree is and what kind of tree it is, and I'd go home and I'd figure out all these various uses. And the reason that I use this one is because it's based on climate zone, and it's based on precipitation for the region. So the uses of, particularly for stormwater, are pretty good. So in this case, a 25-inch sugar maple will intercept about 3,300 gallons of water a year and keep that from becoming runoff. And so what we did was we've looked at a number of things. We're engineers and scientists. We do a lot of hydraulic modeling, and Dr. Zhang at Berkeley is actually doing hydraulic modeling of canopy flow through in the western U.S. from big storms. Some of his work has gone into some of these kinds of calculators. So total stormwater reduction. If you have a 4-inch tree, you planted it a few years ago, it's grown up to be a 4-inch tree, you're going to get somewhere 100, 150 gallons of interception a year. By the time that tree is 10 inches in diameter, that's going to range somewhere between 600 and nearly 800 gallons of interception per tree on an annual basis. And by the time it's a 16-inch tree, it's going to, all be over 1,500 gallons. Now, one thing in all of the calculators and in some of the modeling we've done, we had some folks from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that wanted to look at dewatering certain areas, not locally here, but in the Vicksburg area with black willow, because the perception of people is, boy, if you plant a willow, all it'll do is suck up water. It's a phreatophyte. It goes to where the water is and it sucks it up. I'd like to point out that willows intercept and use just about the same amount as sugar maples, and not nearly as much as bur oaks or white ashes. And the reason has to do with the geometry of the leaves. Total water uptake isn't the greatest there either. Actually, cottonwoods do a better job than willows in total uptake. So for stormwater purposes, I don't know about you, I don't want a cottonwood grove in my backyard. I got enough things to do. I don't want to be walking around picking up cottonwood sticks for the rest of my life. So we need to do things with trees that make sense. It is an individual issue that becomes a community issue, and that's where I'm headed with all this. So how much tree cover is there? What is the effect on stormwater of the Glen Ellen urban forest? That is the village boundary as near as I can figure it, and hopefully I'm right. I wasn't too sure about the triangle, but and it's disconnected. Wow. You can't do that anymore. You have to have contiguous annexation. So anyway, that's the village. It's 6.6 square miles or so. There are several colors of green. You can see in the village links the grass green, and the darker green is the tree canopy. What percent of that inside the yellow box do you think is tree cover?
80.
80?
35? Yeah, 30, 35. Okay, 28.
Okay. All we did was we scanned it and we ran it for raster color, and it's just under 35%.
Pretty good.
Okay, this is, hopefully you recognize part of your downtown, and maybe you never knew how much the railroad tracks curve, but they really do. I was going to try to get all the track, but I was specifically looking at what happens in this neighborhood up here for, because I know something about the tree inventory up there. What would you say that covering there is? It's a trick question.
16.
Oh, you mean including the tracks in the downtown?
What's the tree cover? 40%. It's 35. It's just over 35. So the first one was just under. This is just over.
Oh.
And if we look in the neighborhood itself and take two lots, and I actually had to send this out to my friends at the Southwest Forest Experiment Station to do, which they did for me today, because I thought of it at 4 o'clock this morning.
What streets are those? Can you tell us?
I can, but then Peggy'd have to kill me. And the reason I had to send it to them to scan it and review it is because they had to estimate the impervious surface underneath the canopy. Because even if the canopy intercepts some of it's going to get on the roof and get away from us. So, because the layering it's not as dense as you think. So they blow it way up to 1 pixel per, I forget what it is, a pixel per quarter inch or something. It's unreal, and then they make a color analysis. So anyway, this is a older home with no pre-existing changes, and it's got about 35% impervious surface, and the tree cover is about 60%. A home that is newer is frankly not that much more impervious, though our perception is always they covered every inch of that lot with pavement or rooftop, and it's just not true. First of all, ordinances don't allow it, and second of all, it isn't what happened. But what does happen is the total tree cover that was on that lot goes down because, go back to our 4-inch trees, when they finished, they put new trees in, but even if they put a 4-inch tree in because they wanted to jumpstart it, it takes that tree's canopy time to grow back up and fill that void. And we used to, hot thing when several foresters in here were in their forestry training and I was in graduate school, was gap phase analysis in forests, looking at the hole and how long it took the forest to fill. I'm sorry? So now we're looking at the gaps in the urban forest and how are those going to fill back in and what impact can we have with stormwater. And one of the things is we frankly might need to put more trees out for if we want the same benefit that we had in the pre-development condition. Well, why is that? Because they don't all start out looking like that. That's a lot of surface area to intercept, transfer water, and help it infiltrate slowly into the ground to be reutilized. What's a BMP? We've all heard about stormwater BMPs, best management practice. EPA has a definition, which we have adopted in the state of Illinois, and it is part of our National Pollution Discharge Elimination System stormwater permits, and that is a technique measure or structural control that is used for a given set of conditions to manage the quantity and improve the quality of stormwater runoff in a cost-effective manner. Trees are a BMP then. They slow down raindrop impact. They help with erosion control by having their roots firmly throughout all of the soil. Even if the surface underneath is devoid of vegetation, the root system is usually so intense that it prevents erosion. That's why you'll see areas worn away in soil next to a parkway where people walk all the time, but you won't actually see erosion. And that's because that mass is being held in place. They remove particulate matter from rain, so the water quality impacts and the small storm water quantity impacts are probably the greatest value that we get out of trees. So, what we've been going around and telling people as we've talked about BMPs is trees are a structural BMP. And people need, because every time somebody says, well, I have to put in a structural BMP and I want something that's green. Well, trees are green structure. It's just that simple. We need to sort of move municipal, not the municipal professionals, but elected officials in the direction of understanding that engineered solutions include green infrastructure that's live and that it can truly be structural.
All right, yeah, well, okay, let me finish up. I'm going to speed through this fairly quickly, just to wrap up, because everybody's really enthusiastic to talk, and I got some questions for both Maureen and Pat. In this portion, we kind of covered some of it already, but I'll go a little bit more into detail on energy conservation. Some of it's interesting, but the break is that there's pretty pictures of trees in here. We haven't done this. The tree care seminar, we haven't talked much about pretty trees, so we will look at some of those. Specifically, I want to talk about how do you utilize trees and shrubs in your landscape for energy conservation. And this is interesting. Not a lot of people do this at the outset. So if there's an opportunity to influence your landscape for a new home, that would be really exciting to do. My public relations director, as we talk about energy conserving landscapes, keeps wants me to find a property that we could go to and say this is what they've done. Either they have done it intentionally, or if your yard fits this description, please let me know, because there are times we want to promote this. So using your landscape, this is part of being in an urban ecosystem. Pat talked about that to some degree, but part of a community forest is that we have expectations of our landscaping. We want to take care of it, but we interact with it, we live with it. So it isn't just beautiful, but that the landscape has function and does things that can make our lives better. Some of them consciously, some of them not. So using the vegetation around us to improve our local living environment. So let's go through that. Okay, shade is cool. This gentleman is not. But if you've noticed, the shade, shade under a tree is cool. And it's cooler than under a canopy. It's not just that the blocking of the sun and the heating up of the air under it that's cooler, but through evapotranspiration, giving off water. Pat talked about that. Trees don't perspire, but as they move water through, it evaporates, and that produces a cooling effect. It's in burning up that water, so it actually is cooler. I used to drive home through a forest preserve, and it's warm, and then you hit it cool, a shady block, and the temperature drops dramatically through evapotranspiration. We talked about heat islands. This is, again, something you might notice. Who works downtown? You get off the train, when you come home, a heck of a lot cooler. The city center, the more pavement you have, it's not just the lack of tree cover, it's absorption of all of that gray infrastructure that captures and retains heat. It's all the roofs, it's all the activities of our daily lives, cars and human beings, and all of that generates heat, and it gets pretty hot. So much cooler out into suburban residential and rural farmland. So collectively speaking, again, as a community forest, planting a lot of trees can mitigate this heat island effect. This is infrared, and you can see the developed areas on the temperature. I don't actually know how to read that, but red is hot, so the red areas are hotter. I'm also trying to go fast so we can all go home. The Chicago weather, and I kind of alluded to this, some of the really romantic figures, romanticized role of trees and energy conservation come from warmer climates. We have some extremes in Chicago weather. We get some really hot days, as you know it, and the most money we spend on energy has to do with heating energy. It's a cold climate. So all of this particular talk was adapted from some friends in Minnesota that understand what we go through in the winter times. I love winter too. So we spend 10 times more money on heating than cooling. The planting of the 3 shade trees, depending on energy cost, this is very much a Chicago figure, 6.5%, which I don't know what your heating bills are like, but between $250 annually. Does that sound right? Anybody good at math? Sound reasonable? Nothing to really ignore. So winter heating, it's about solar gain. And in the summertime, you don't want sun. In the wintertime, you really want to get as much of the sun's energy in as possible. And that solar gain can really augment the impact of your heating system. And Lori talked about this, escaping energy or escaping warm air. It can be very expensive too, and maybe you should come back sometime and talk more about weatherizing your home to block that. But you want warm sunlight to enter your home and keep the warm air in. Winds are another component in terms of heat loss, and we usually get northwesterly winds in the Chicagoland area. Is that right? Yeah. So solar gain is a source of free solar energy, passive solar heating. Lauren maybe can answer questions on that. That's why I'm going to skim over this a little bit. And the solar gain in the wintertime, good thing. Solar gain in the summertime, bad thing. That's not really a surprise. A lot of it enters through the roof. And again, maybe Lauren can correct me here on some of this. So as a matter of fact, I will skip over some of it because she probably knows more about it than I do. Shading and evapotranspiration can reduce the air temperature, surrounding air temperature around your home by 12 degrees, and that's that cooling, evapotranspirative effect. Unwanted summer heat comes through east and west facing windows as well as through walls and the rooftop. When you're considering your landscape, this is the strategy of placing trees around the landscape, is that the amount of shade that those trees cast, or pretty much any structure in your yard, changes over the course of a year because the sun's angle is very different in the wintertime. And I had that moving sun. I wish I could model it better for you. But the summer sun is very high in the sky, so your July, you have a shade tree. Look at the size of the circles. In July, this is the tree pruned on the south, but you see the size of the circle when the sun is directly overhead is much smaller. In the wintertime, when the sun is much lower in the sky, this creates a broad oval or a long shadow from the tree. So you have to think about, from anything, you can see the angle or the shade cast by the home is much longer because of the angle of the sun. So any planting you do, anything blocking the south wall is going to be dramatic in the summertime. You also want to think in the wintertime. You also want to think in the summertime about where you want to cast that shade strategically, both for energy conservation, but I always tell people, think about how you use your yard in the summertime and where are you when you're most looking for shade. Is it when you're doing a cookout on your backyard? Think about where that shade casts. You can do an audit. You can put up an umbrella in your yard and just follow the patterns over the course of the day if you have that opportunity. So you can also see a tree on the west side in terms of allowing access here. So the tree on the west side casting shade in the summertime directly over the roof of the home. And that's where you're getting your maximum conservation in terms of cooling, is when you're shading on the hottest part of the day. 4 o'clock in July, 4 o'clock in the afternoon is going to be the hottest part of the day. So if you're planting on the west wall in January, there's no shade whatsoever on the roof, so you're not blocking any of that's desired solar gain in the winter time. So I'm going to, again, try to go through this quickly with some key points here. You want to shade the east and the west walls of your home. You do not want to shade the south wall. You want to shade the roof and cover paved areas because you have your own little mini heat island with driveways and sidewalks and patios. Shade the air conditioner for increased energy. You want to plant foundation plantings, and if you have a yard big enough for an effective windbreak, you want to plant a windbreak. So planting on the west wall is most effective. This is where you're getting your gain. Do you guys get that in terms of the where the shadows cast? And the studies that were done in the Chicagoland area looked at trees shading the west wall of the home. You want the maximum shading on the side of your house and on the structure. East walls is another opportunity before your house heats up. As the sun comes up in the morning, you want the branches to be low and to shade as much of the house, not over the house, but to shade the east wall as you possibly can. You don't need to get much taller than the house either. So this is ideal. How it works with your landscape is another issue too. Your east wall trees are going to be trees that don't like searing sun. If you're gardeners, you know morning sun is very different than afternoon sun. So this is where you can plant some desirable trees that don't like hot sun. Ironwood is a really beautiful native tree, more of an understory tree, and therefore something you can use on the east wall, definitely not on the west. Here's your pretty pictures, I promise. Amelanker's kind of a pretty one, Four Seasons of Interest. Has the right kind of a shape. I sort of like them low and broad for shading a home. Yellowwood, you have any yellowwood in Glen Ellen? Yeah. Gorgeous tree. I live right down the street from some in Bloomingdale. East wall redbud. I'm not a big fan of redbud in the hot sun. You guys probably know that tree. It's beautiful. But on a lower, on a smaller home can provide just the amount of shade on the east wall. West wall, same type of branching. You want it as tall as the house. And I like the shape of like a buckeye tree. This is a red, it's red horse chestnut, Bomea. Okay. Broad branching, you can see the perfect shape there that is, if you can plant that up against the wall of your home and cast the perfect shade on it, this is ideal. It also will take the sun, grow about mid-size, and keep the shadow right on your house where you want it. Japanese tree lilac is another one, sort of a good, thick crown, provide shade, I think, in the right places, gives you later summer flowers, really pretty tree. And trees that you can use on either side are going to be crab apples. There are very good crab apples. If you had a bad experience, make sure you choose carefully. We have some a crab apple selection guide on the Arboretum's website, and I have one flyer up there on tree selection. But please, crab apples can be fabulous. There's about 400 cultivars of them, and probably 30 of them are going to be really ideal in your landscape, and some of them might be more problematic. But really hardy, tough trees can take some hot sun. Cornelian cherry dogwood, very early spring flowers, is really pretty, and the red fruits later in the year, pretty fall color. It's a fabulous little tree, and kind of a nice, broad, stocky shape that will cast the right shade depending on the size and shape of your home. If you think of layering for winter, how you dress if you're an outdoors person at all, you think about trapping heat, so you dress in layers. The same is true with your home. And you can do that, you can have the evaporative transpiration effect, because all plants try to move water through their system, so they're going to provide some cooling benefits. But if you can get a little layer of air with, say, a structure for holding up vines, you can do that on the east or the west wall of your home and still have some shading benefits. Deciduous vines are going to be probably the very best in our climate. So some examples for deciduous vines: climbing hydrangea. Anybody have one? Come see it if you do. Virginia creeper is a native. These are both really lovely climbing vines. Hydrangeas. We have one at the Arboretum, and I planted one. I'll probably wait 30 years for it to grow, but beautiful flowers and give you all the benefits of a tree or shrub, but vertically speaking. And so just to kind of drive the point home about the south-facing wall is it's really important for the sun to come through. So it's okay to plant on the south side of the house depending on the shape and structure of your home. It might be a little bit harder with a two-story home, provided you're getting shade in exactly where you want it and where you place it relative to the house. So in the summertime, the shadow of this tree, if it's located too far away from your home based on the size and shape of the tree, you're missing the shading of the roof. You're casting below that, and that might be great if this is where your kids play in the afternoon, or that's where your patio chair is, or something like that. That may be great for landscape purposes, but from an energy conservation point, you're kind of missing maximum shading here. And the reason that we want to avoid planting the south wall at all in this climate is that the gain that you would get in terms of saving energy in the summertime would be lost, because if our heating bills are 10 times greater than our cooling bills, you don't want to block any solar gain. So a little bit of shading with a deciduous tree, and it doesn't look like much for shade on the home there, but that's just the structure of the branches, that will offset any summer gain that you get. So you really don't want any shade on your home, particularly a large deciduous tree. And again, watch for it now if you've got some trees around your yard to see the kind of shade that you're getting even in the wintertime or even now as the leaves are falling. Notice whether or not that's casting shade there. So is it a situation that you can maybe prune up? And I do have some pictures of ideal south-facing our trees for the south wall. This is what I would call ideal in terms of shape. This is an American elm. And, we can't have that anymore, but the hybrid elms are coming awfully close to what we're able to do. But that tall structure that's clear, and if you can picture your home here on the south wall, in the winter time anyway, when the sun is really low, the sun would come low in the sky and hopefully not be casting shade if your house is right behind it. In the summertime, if the sun is up high, if planted correctly, that canopy could be covering your home and providing a canopy or a shade, think like a shade umbrella. So you want open branched if you can. This is the ideal kind of a branching structure for an energy conserving tree that might be shading the south, or if you can do it southwest is going to be ideal. So large leaves give you a very open structure. And this is the same kind of a thing that makes people not like Kentucky coffee trees around here, is that open branch structure. But actually, walnut, being a compound leaf, has actually a very large leaf. So it has a very, what we call, coarse winter texture. And if you have a black walnut, you probably don't like it in your yard. But it's a good tree for energy conservation. Black locust, another one that may not be totally commonly beloved. I happen to be extremely fond of the flowers, and it has that ideal shape. I've had good luck with it. Do you have any? Yeah. Kind of coming back into popularity, but that tall kind of a canopy. Kentucky coffee tree. If you guys know the tree, really lovely, beautiful, very bare in the winter when it's a young tree, but a very elegant shape. And the leaves on it, leaflets are small. The leaves could be like that big, so it's ideal and perfect and hardy. London plane tree is another pretty one. Shade the roof, shade the pavement, looking strategically at where you have pavement, you can shade the driveway in addition to shading your home. Shade your air conditioner, and you'll need to keep plants about 3 feet away, but this can increase energy efficiency. Lorraine, would you say that's valid? 40%? And this can be things like grasses, shrubs. This doesn't have to be trees. It's a very simple landscape, not that you wouldn't want to hide a structure like that. Anyway, foundation plantings, we commonly do this just because it's an accepted look, but planted effectively with some distance, creating that air buffer there, you can provide insulation both in summer and in winter. So foundation shrubs are going to be very good. You probably want to avoid the south wall again, because you really don't want any shade on your home in the wintertime. And then the windbreaks, I don't talk about it much because the distance by which you need to plant trees from your home in order to be effective is pretty large. So it's, I've got the brochure there, 4 or 5 times the height of the tree. So if you're talking like a blue spruce, which is ideal, you need a couple of rows of evergreens, 2 to 4 to 5 times the height of the evergreen tree, and that can be very difficult in most suburban yards. But if you have property in Wisconsin or something, you want to play around with it, that's why when you're driving through the countryside, you'll see these big, large windbreaks, particularly around foundation plants. I mean, around farms and such, large properties. So I buzzed through it. There's a handout, very good one. We did a little blue-colored one on sort of designing your home landscape. The National Arbor Day Foundation, I also brought some brochures there. It has a very good handout on designing energy-conserving landscape. So I wanted to conclude quickly so we would have some opportunity for questions. So I don't know if you want to just listen to questions.
I just want to take a quick opportunity to thank the speakers and you all for coming. Everybody, mostly everybody I'm sure, has a day job, and for them to come and share their expertise with us, I truly appreciate it because I really learned a lot tonight and good thoughts. So I just want to open it up for question and answers for any of the speakers if anybody has any questions. And I know that Edith said that she'd stay till probably 11 o'clock if you want.
One quick question. When will this tree survey, the 2010 survey, have some recommendations about what we have lots of, what we have little of? I mean, I assume you're going to know how many oaks and elms and things. Right. So I assume part of that might be to encourage us to plant some that we don't have as much of. For instance, like oaks, I assume we're not as many oaks.
Yes.
And I'm hoping to plant a tree, and so I'm wondering, she knows all about that. But
Is she looking at me?
Yeah. But I wondered how soon, because maybe Peggy will agree to a tree that's in need. I don't know whether she will.
The tree census, we're expecting to have the results. We're hoping for early next year. It is, I'm just going to caution, it's at a very large scale. So when we do all of DuPage County, there are 200 plots per county. And we then stratify that or sort of isolate the data by land use type. So we can separate out residential land uses, what we can tell the predominant trees on residential landscapes, and we'll be able to sort out how big these trees are. From the study that was done in '93, the one that Pat was referring to, I think I talked about this when the Arboretum we introduced this, we found out that mature oaks actually only make up about 3% of the landscape in residential areas, and that's a good thing to know when you're considering how to preserve or to plant, trees as you develop residence. So that's the kind of thing we can learn. But when it comes to community recommendations, you know, we have, I kind of guesstimated maybe 3 plots per town. And that would include, you know, dropping the middle of the metro tracks, because the community, the urban forest is everything. Schoolyards, we had some plots in the middle of I-88, we did not make them. The students go out there and measure them. So it's kind of a gross scale for much of an analysis. But if you wanted to do a community study like that with iTree, it's about 200 plots per community. I think they probably do it with a smaller sample. But some communities with adequate resources have done their own inventory. So it's very valuable information at a regional level.
Somebody had a slide, I forget who, about motivating people to be interested in trees or any environmental issue. And it made me think of an email I got today that basically said, you don't motivate people by throwing facts and figures in front of them, which is what we do to ourselves as a group. Apparently what does it is peer pressure. And I don't know if anybody's thought about that or dealt with that issue, but they did some studies recently that suggested that if you really want to have people care about trees, you convince, like say somebody moves to go on and wants to fit in. If they get the sense that everybody around them cares about trees, they'll suddenly care about trees because they want to, it's peer pressure. That apparently is the #1 way to get people to recycle. And I think that works for Glenelg for recycling because everybody sees, well, my neighbors are putting out the recycling plans, I guess I better use mine too. And I noticed in our neighborhood it's 100% participation because of that. I just wonder if there's a way to use that when we do
I think
planning.
they do. I think they give the gems of Glenelg out.
Yeah.
Do they not?
Which one come out?
To new, I thought they gave out gems of Glenelg to each new resident that moves in.
I've heard that.
I know we used to.
Yeah, they used to.
Lauren, do you have any comment on the peer pressure thing?
Yeah, there's some validity to it. I think I might have been the one that had the slide about student motivation and there is something to it, but also homeowners really do, and this is your sustainability meeting, I imagine. You all seem to be very well versed to some extent on the concepts, not necessarily the particulars. Thank you very much, by the way. I learned a lot tonight, so I'm always learning, but we're really starting to see people going to more of these kind of events and really wanting to learn more. And it's not a keeping up with the Joneses, because I'm not necessarily seeing tons of people buying Priuses, but there's a Prii. Don't even know what the plurality of that word would be. But, yeah, I do think it is making an impact, like you said, with the recycling, and everyone's trying to do their little thing.
Just a follow-up thought, when we moved here in 1955, the developer or the builder gave each homeowner that built a house 2 trees. And, you know, people were moving out of the city, and, you know, trees weren't a reality, you know, coming from the city. And even though they might say, gee, it's a good idea, you know, they just spent $15,000 for a house and they didn't have any money left over to put in landscaping or trees. The numbers are different today, but the sensitivity is still there. We know that it's important, but people do need to have a push of some kind. And I just wanted to share that story, because I would take care of those trees knowing that they were a gift, you know, for 30 years. And you know, that's how you connect to the tree. That's how you connect to the community, by taking care of something that you put into the ground.
That's a rare benevolence.
Yeah.
Because now it is required by municipalities, and you're lucky if you even get 1 tree. So it's not all developers are as far-sighted as.
But it was having a change of thinking, you know, being able to get over the hump, and get over the edge. And, you know, it's a public policy to want to have a canopy, you know, a community of trees. But many people won't do it voluntarily for the right, what we may consider in this room, the right reasons. They have to have an incentive of some sort, and oftentimes a gift.
Well, to be honest with you, though, if a strategy or a green building technique or putting in trees, if it doesn't make economic sense along with the social and environmental, it's an unstable tripod. So if there really isn't an economic benefit, you can't. That's not sustainable over time. But if all you're going to focus on is the money aspect, then you sort of lose the soul and you forget about the social aspect. And I mean, it's a very heavily intertwined model, if you will. I think they call it people, planet, profit, something like that. It's just, you got to think about all three.
And I just want to echo a little bit of sort of you said some wonderful things. I don't know if you're on tape, but I'd like to use your quote. They're very nicely said about the community of trees and community forests. I have the pleasure of going to an awful lot of communities and looking at the interaction people have with trees. And I'm very interested in that legacy, particularly communities that were founded with a tree theme, if you will, something arboreal, and how communities protect that. And I can't tell you how many communities I've been to where tree preservation might have been an issue, and people turn around and point to the logo, where's the grove in whatever grove you're dealing with, or where oak something community. And so I think there is something to be said for that connection that people have to trees and thinking about sort of the legacy. And just Mayor Daley, having planted, as he's looking at leaving office, I've been around some community civic discussions anyway, where that comes up as something that is going to be his legacy for having changed the greening of the city. And it's made fabulous economic sense as well, but it kind of comes from a place in Mayor Daley's situation. It happened to be a motivation about just wanting people to feel good. And I know that because I was there at the ground floor. Again, it made great economic sense, and people got behind it probably. Remember, I'm talking to developers that wanted to put in trees just so that the mayor would approve it, a project. So, there's your people planet profit, but it happened to have come from a place where people were connected.
I want to take that one step further, and that is the community forest needs maintenance, and you have a village forester here in Glen Ellen, and you have a public works program that takes care of that. I'm a member of American Public Works Association and worked on a national tree task force for them. And as public works budgets are under fire in a recession, the deferral of tree maintenance is probably the single biggest concern that public works officials have. So you have an advocacy here in this room, you're residents of this village, you will have a budget. I don't know what your budget cycle is, but you should pay attention to your urban forestry budget and whether the urban forest that belongs to the village and its people are in fact being cared for at the level that it needs to happen. Because there are no choices on water supply, sanitary sewer, and stormwater maintenance. Those are determined to be public safety interests, and we don't treat the urban forest as a public safety interest until we have an ice storm, a tornado, some sort of natural disaster associated with it. So it's very easy for urban forestry budgets to erode. Peggy did not ask me to get up here and make this commercial on behalf of urban forestry.
I'm like freaking out right now.
But what I can tell you from having looked at it on a national perspective for APWA, it is a very, very serious concern. And a number of the villages and towns where we represent the village as municipal engineer, elected officials find tree care to be a soft public works function, meaning that in a poor economy, it can be deferred. Deferring a pruning cycle sets the whole village back a number of years. If the village is on a 7-year pruning cycle and you defer 1, 2, 3 years, all of a sudden you're having a 10, 12, 13-year impact on the management of your urban forest, and it will in fact result in additional costs later on. So again, this is an enlightened group of people. Think about that when the village budget comes around next time.
I just asked, we don't have any of our village board trustee members here tonight. I mean, it seems like this is a presentation that should have been at the Village Board of Trustees.
We had one, she was here.
Well, I know, but she's going off and she's already been, she's been a fantastic advocate. She was, we did it, but I mean, what you said tonight, you're saying to us, and then it becomes not the educated wisdom of the people who are actually doing the voting and addressing the very things you said. We can go and find, complain, we do, and we send petitions, and some of us are involved in a petition to have a new tree ordinance supported. But it's, until they have heard the kind of things, you're an expert from the outside. They tend to believe experts from the outside more than they tend to believe the people they've hired and the people who live in the town. And it's just...
The only reason I'm an expert is because I'm 25 miles from home right now.
Yeah,
Really, honestly,
Well,
the groundswell of support from within for budgets is where it has to come from. The APWA did try in a number of, we're divided into, we have a metro chapter and then we're divided into branches. And the Fox Valley branch tried to send public works officials from various towns to be experts to help with budget issues in other towns, and it was just seen as interference. Now these really are the public works officials who know what it costs and know what equipment you have to buy and how to maintain it and all of that. So while I don't disagree with you, it will have to happen here. I'm just telling you, the tree maintenance budget for this town will only, if it isn't maintained, the urban forest will suffer as a result of that, and it will suffer for some period of time.
To piggyback off of that, I believe that the village forestry individual should be separate and apart from public works, because it's clear, it's obvious in this town, I'm sure, to me anyways, there's too much pressure or influence by the public works department in setting a healthy tree environment, that if the village forester had more say, had more power, more leverage, I think that we would have I think a healthier tree environment, and
I completely believed that when I worked at the Morton Arboretum. I was convinced and advocated for that as an APWA member. And then I was involved in, I was asked by there's a Northwest Suburban Municipal Council. I was asked to audit 4 communities because of some federal funding issues. And to be honest with you, I've come to another conclusion, and that is the tree maintenance program, not the ordinance care, but the tree maintenance program is truly a public works function, and it simply needs the professionals to have the same levels of responsibility and authority within the organization, and then it can be carried out just like water, just like sewer, just like stormwater, just like street maintenance. But they're all funded in different ways, and by and large, tree maintenance and the tree programs are the only things that are funded out of local dollars only, plus grant funding. Almost everything else has a state or federal source behind it. Street maintenance, motor fuel tax. Water and sewer rates, payers, those are in fact utilities, even though in Illinois we don't set them up mostly as separate utilities, we leave them in the village and you're charged for them. So for the most part, there isn't a tree tax. But the fact of the matter is there needs to be dedicated funding. So.